And little did we know at that time that this event, honoring her would also make a perfect inspiration for our closing virtual event. But before I turn it over to Diane, I want to look briefly back on this very special year. Now, this was not the 50th anniversary celebration that we envisioned when the planning committee started working in early of 2019. But in some ways, we were even more pleased with the ways we have connected this year. While nothing can take the place of our events that we have in our time together at Lafayette, our virtual events have brought so many of us back together again. Just watching the chat on that first host as roommates reconnected after years apart was truly heartwarming. On each call, at least one person mentioned Sharon Gish or Barbara Young and their impact on our Lafayette experience. And we were able to bring them together with athletic alumni for an event in March. In February, Ellen Kravitz-Burke and Liza Lucy showed us just how connected we all are through the threads that weave us together. And that the CLW conference provided 2 weeks of truly impactful programming. In addition, there are a lot of web stories and magazine articles and additional events and videos to enjoy. And now, as we wrap up this year, I truly want to thank everyone who has participated at all levels. There are too many to name, but I will just say thank you so much for making this year such a positive celebration and for our experience at Lafayette. And I have to shout out special thanks to Dana Kellogg and Jennifer Rock, who truly guided us seamlessly throughout this year. Thank you, Jennifer and Dana. Now, on this lovely June evening, some of you have thunderstorms, some of you have lovely weather. I hope you'll join with me in sitting back with your cocktails, without spilling this, if I can raise it there, to learn a little more about a first woman at Lafayette. So please join me in welcoming Diane Shaw, Director Emeriti of Special Collections and College Archives at Lafayette, who is also recognized in our 50 for 50 article on the website to lead our program. Thank you and welcome, Diane.
There I go. All right, great. Thank you so much, Barbara, and good evening, everyone. It is both a pleasure and an honor to be part of the closing events for this wonderful celebration of 50 years of coeducation. At some point during my 34 years at Lafayette, I realized that when I arrived in 1985, coeducation had only been in place for 15 years. And looking back at 1985 helped me to realize how much had changed and how far we have come as an institution. I'd like to extend very special greetings to the class of 1974. Many of you know that I claim honorary membership in this class because I was also a class of 1974, but at Emory University. And this evening, I'm delighted to share the story of Adrienne de Noailles de Lafayette, a truly remarkable woman. I will be happy to respond to questions at the end. So I will ask that if you have a question, please put a question mark in the chat box, and then we will know to call on you to ask your question directly. Okay, so now I'm gonna bring up my PowerPoint and we'll share the screen, and hopefully this will work. Okay. Oops. I think I have closed it inadvertently, which has happened to me in the past. Do you guys want to launch it, Jennifer?
Sure.
I can.
Go ahead. Oh, you got it, Dana?
Yeah, I can do it. No problem. Hold on one moment. Okay, let's move this slideshow. All right, can you see that, Diane?
I can.
Okay, and if you just say next as we're going along,
Okay.
I'll forward the slides for you.
That's great. I've really appreciated the help here
Sure.
from Jennifer and Dana, especially. Okay. Next, please.
No, it's not letting me, hold on. I've had this problem before where it's a little bit slow with changing the slides.
Hmm.
Okay, this is your next slide?
Yep. Mhm.
Okay, great.
Great. Okay. By the time he reached the age of 13 in 1770, the Marquis de Lafayette was an orphan with one of the largest fortunes in France. His legal guardian, his great-grandfather, arranged for him to enter the King's Musketeers. This is the same regiment made famous by Alexander Dumas in The Three Musketeers. It was there that he caught the attention of the Duc d'Ayen, who was looking for husbands for his 5 daughters. In the 18th century, as you probably know, marriage was a contract, and the Duke needed husbands of suitable nobility and wealth. The Duc d'Ayen was extremely wealthy and powerful himself. He was in line to inherit his father's positions as captain of the king's bodyguard, governor of the province of Roussillon, and governor of the king's Chateau Saint-Germain. His wife, Henriette d'Ayen, although not of the nobility, was the granddaughter of Chancellor d'Aguesseau, one of Louis XV's most learned and honorable jurists and ministers. Henriette was well educated, intelligent, and pious. At age 31, about the time of the birth of her only son, who did not live, she came down with smallpox. Although she recovered, she was badly disfigured and lived out her life privately with great emphasis on religious piety. In fact, she wanted 2 parish beggars to be the godparents of her daughter Clotilda, but her husband would not allow it. Okay. The Ayen mansion, which you see here, called the Hotel de Noailles, was on the Rue Saint-Honoré with gardens extending to the Tuileries. Here's how it looks today, next. And it's actually a hotel now, a true hotel in Paris. The house was filled with great paintings by Leonardo, Raphael, Rubens, Van Dyck, Rembrandt, Watteau, and Fragonard. John Adams, who dined there in 1778, said that the Ayens lived in all the splendor and magnificence of a viceroy. The education of the 5 Ayen daughters was undertaken by their mother. Every day, she would gather them around her to talk about the lessons and events of the day. They learned the Catechism, the Old and New Testaments, geography, history, mythology, and the plays of Voltaire, Racine, and Corneille. They were taught to think for themselves. In fact, Adrienne had religious doubts, so she was permitted to delay her first communion. And it was Adrienne, the second daughter at age 12, that the Duc d'Ayen selected to be betrothed to the 14-year-old Lafayette. His arrangement with Lafayette's guardian included a dowry of 400,000 livres, about $1 million in today's money. Unfortunately, there was a stumbling block. Adrienne's mother, the Duchess d'Ayen, did not like Lafayette. She thought him too cold, too reserved, and that the couple was too young. Finally, the Duchess consented tentatively to the following terms. Number 1, Lafayette had to move to the family's Versailles mansion, another home that they owned, so that she could observe him. Number 2, the engagement would be a secret, and Adrienne would not be informed for another 1.5 years, although Lafayette knew about it. Number 3, the wedding would take place 6 months after the secret was revealed, and the couple would live with the Ayen family in Paris. After frequent visits to Versailles, the Duchess began to melt. She had discovered that the young man was actually very warm and engaging with, quote, the most active spirit, the firmest character, and the most passionate soul, end quote. Apparently, Adrienne had discovered these things too, because when her mother broke the news about the engagement, well ahead of schedule, she found that she had to try to calm her daughter's great excitement. The couple was married on April 11th, 1774 at her family's home in Paris. He was 14, she was 14 and he was 16. And this is her wedding portrait. Next, Dana. Oops. And there you see her wonderful hair. She's adorable here, I think. At any rate, the next slide is a copy of their the menu from their wedding banquet, which has been preserved. Shortly after the wedding, Lafayette was promoted to captain of his father-in-law's regiment and posted for duty in the city of Metz. This is a portrait next of Lafayette at Metz, next one, which is owned by Lafayette College. Some of you will recognize this. It got a lot of traffic during the 200th birthday celebration for Lafayette. Soon, Adrienne wrote to Lafayette that she was pregnant. Despite his very loving relationship with Adrienne, Lafayette probably did have at least one mistress during this period, something common for the time, and Adrienne more or less accepted the situation. This first pregnancy ended in a miscarriage, but she was soon pregnant again. And in response to the news, Lafayette wrote the following to her. Quote, "Your news gave me a happiness that I was not expecting. This little being is our little being, which makes me happy. It seems to me that we love each other more because of it. I am already the most loving father of a family. It is so easy when I love you as I do. I could not have believed that your news would move me so deeply." This pregnancy ended happily with Adrienne giving birth to the couple's first child, a daughter they named Henriette after Adrienne's mother. It was soon after this that Lafayette made the fateful decision to go to America to aid in the cause for American independence. He would do this against the wishes of the King of France and his very powerful father-in-law, and he would leave without telling Adrienne, who was by then pregnant again. Later in life, Adrienne wrote about this event, quote, "Monsieur de Lafayette carried out in the month of April the plan he had been meditating for 6 months to serve the cause of American independence. I was with child and I loved him dearly. My father and the rest of the family were all in a violent rage at the news. My mother, worried about the effect the departure might have on me, was alarmed herself about the dangers far away to a son she cherished so tenderly. Her feelings for him made it possible to soften my own heartbreak. She herself informed me of the cruel departure and took care of consoling me." End quote. Lafayette was at least remorseful and very eager for forgiveness. He wrote to Adrienne, this is what he wrote to her, quote, "It is from very far away that I am writing you, my dear heart, and to this cruel separation is added the uncertainty, still more dreadful, of when I will be able to have news of you. How did you take my second departure? Did you love me less? Did you forgive me? Your laments, those of my friends, thoughts of Henriette, welled up in my heart in an agonizing way. If you knew all that I have suffered, the sad days that I have passed fleeing all that I love in the world, to this misery shall I join that of learning that you do not forgive me." I think Lafayette is pretty good at making himself the victim here, the injured party. During the 2-month voyage to America, Lafayette wrote a long journal-style letter to Adrienne. As the ship neared the coast of South Carolina, he wrote the following memorable words. Slide, next one. "The welfare of America is intimately connected with the happiness of all mankind. She, America, will become the respectable and safe asylum of virtue, integrity, tolerance, equality, and a peaceful liberty." you see that Lafayette had high hopes for America, and I think there's much to still aspire to there. But he told Adrienne, he said, for my sake, I know you will become a good American. And then he wrote these words that you see. After only 2 months in America, Lafayette displayed great bravery at the Battle of Brandywine. Next. But was wounded in the leg and taken to Bethlehem, right in the Lehigh Valley, to recover. From Bethlehem, Lafayette wrote Adrienne highly amusing letters, making light of his wound and telling her how she should act as the wife of an American major general. As Lafayette began to achieve his singular successes in America, including his role in bringing in the French to aid the cause, he became highly popular in France. At a gathering to honor Voltaire, next, the great writer, one more, yeah, there's Voltaire. The great writer himself came up to Adrienne and fell on his knees before her. She was also visited by delegations of Americans, Benjamin Franklin and John Adams among them, acknowledging Lafayette's role in the Revolution. In 1779, Lafayette returned home for a lengthy visit. There he found his daughter Anastasie, whom he had never seen, and mourned the passing of Henriette, his oldest daughter, who had died at age 2. Adrienne was delighted to have Lafayette home. She wrote to Lafayette's aunt about her joy, and this is what she said. Let's see. My happiness is easy to believe, impossible to express. Monsieur de Lafayette has returned as modest and as charming as when you last saw him. The most distinguished and gracious person in the world. This is whom God has preserved for us in the midst of the enormous dangers. For me, when I reflect on my place in life to be his wife, I am truly grateful to God. I find myself so far from being gracious like he that I am distressed about it, and I hope that my affection makes up for my shortcomings, end quote. During his stay in France, the couple welcomed another child, a son, whom they named George Washington Lafayette after Lafayette's mentor and adopted father, the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. In 1780, Lafayette returned to America, where he played a pivotal role in the Yorktown campaign, which ended with the surrender of Cornwallis and ultimately brought about the end of the American Revolution. When Lafayette finally arrived home to Paris in January of 1782, no one was home to greet him. Adrienne was at a special event with the king and queen. When word spread of Lafayette's arrival, the queen, who was Marie Antoinette, and next slide, here she is with her 2 children. Marie Antoinette insisted on driving Adrienne straight home in her own carriage. The queen greeted Lafayette warmly and congratulated him on his success. When she told Adrienne to get out of the carriage, Adrienne was so overcome that she fainted in Lafayette's arms. The next several years were busy and happy ones for the young couple. They welcomed another daughter, whom they named Marie Antoinette Virginie, to be known as Virginie, after the place where Lafayette had attained such success in America, the colony state of Virginia. Upon the birth of Virginie, Ben Franklin wrote a letter to Lafayette saying that it was clear that all of Lafayette's subsequent children would be named after American colonies. And while Carolina and Georgia would do well for girls, he did not think that Massachusetts and Connecticut would sound very good for the boys. Soon after Virginie's birth, the couple moved into their own house, frequently entertaining American visitors, including the Adamses and the Jays. Mrs. Jay's daughter, Abigail, described Adrienne as, quote, sprightly and very pleasing. I had always heard she was handsome. I do not think so. She was not painted and very little dressed. So, obviously. One of the causes they became involved with was the purchase of a plantation in the French colony of Guyane in South America. Next slide. Where Lafayette wanted to try an experiment in the gradual emancipation of the enslaved people that he had purchased with the property. His goal was to educate the slaves, teach them a useful trade, and then to free them. He had become by this time an ardent opponent of slavery. Much of the running of the Guyane estates fell to Adrienne as Lafayette became increasingly drawn into the unfolding drama that became the French Revolution. Adrienne relished this role, corresponding frequently with the estate managers, as well as the priests at a nearby seminary, whom she had asked to look after the religious welfare of the slaves. In the early days of the French Revolution, next, Lafayette was one of the leaders. As head of the National Guard, he was in charge of all military and police matters in Paris. Adrienne participated as well in the new order of things. She and 12-year-old Anastasie and George took up collections for the poor at parish churches, prayed for the dead and citizens wounded in the storming of the Bastille, and attended blessings of battalion colors. She donated silver items to the National Mint and instructed her staff to buy only the dark bread served in poor houses. Just as Lafayette was celebrated as the city's father provider, Adrienne was called the Universal Mother. Still, she was worried. According to daughter Virginie, who later wrote about her mother's role, and this is what Virginie wrote about her mother, quote, "She did the honors of her house in a way that charmed her numerous guests, but what she suffered in the depths of her heart could not be judged except by those who heard her speak of it. She saw my father at the head of a revolution, the end of which was impossible to foresee. She judged each misfortune, each disorder completely without illusions. She was, however, always sustained by my father's principles, and so convinced of the good that he could do, of the evil that he was able to prevent, that she endured with incredible strength the continual dangers to which he was exposed. Never, she told us, did she see him go out during those days without thinking that she was saying goodbye to him for the last time. No one was more terrified than she of the perils in those days to those she loved, but she rose above herself and was, with my father, devoted to the hope of preventing crimes." As time passed, Lafayette's centrist position as a supporter of the constitutional monarchy became more and more unacceptable to the more radical leaders of the revolution. He was forced to flee France in August of 1792. Next slide. When the assembly ordered him to relinquish his command and begin to prepare an indictment against him for treason. So Lafayette was going to be guillotined, and he knew that, and he chose to flee across the border to Belgium. He was hoping to get to England, and then hoping to get to America. But he was captured at the Austrian border. Austria had declared war on France that spring because of the revolution. And they captured Lafayette, who was serving with the army on the northern border. Uncertain about his future, Lafayette wrote the following to Adrienne, quote, "As for me, my ruin has long been determined. With more ambition than moral principles, I could have had a very different life than this, but there will never be any connection between me and criminal acts. I have to the last upheld the Constitution to which I swore allegiance. You know that my heart would have been Republican if my reason had not given me this shade of royalism, and if my fidelity to my oaths and to the national will had not made me a defender of the constitutional rights of the king. But the less others dared to resist, the more my voice was raised, and I became the target of all the attacks. I do not know how long my journey will be delayed, but I'm going to England, where I wish that my family might come to join me. I make no excuse, neither to my children nor to you, for having ruined my family. There is not one of you who would wish to owe his fortune to conduct contrary to my conscience. Come, join me in England. Let us establish ourselves in America. We will find there liberty that no longer exists in France, and my love will seek to compensate you for all the happiness that you will have lost. Goodbye, my dear heart. Adrienne was then in southern France at Lafayette's birthplace. Next slide, please. Oops, one more back. This is the Chateau Chavignac, Lafayette's birthplace, and our Kirby Chateau was named in honor of that, of this house. Adrienne was there. She had taken refuge in South Central France, which is where the chateau is located. She felt compelled to send George Washington Lafayette into hiding, and she sent her daughters to another chateau some distance away. When all seemed quiet, she allowed them to return. Then on September 10th, 1792, a party of soldiers arrived with orders from Paris to arrest them all. After an impassioned appeal, she was allowed to return to Chavignac under house arrest. It was soon after that she learned that Lafayette had never made it to England and instead had been imprisoned at Spandau near Berlin by the Prussians to whom he had been transferred by the Austrians. She wrote letter after letter to George Washington asking him to intercede on Lafayette's behalf. Diplomatically constrained, Washington sent money to Adrienne and prayers, but did not take action. She wrote other letters, including one to the King of Prussia. On October 13th, 1793, Adrienne was arrested and imprisoned at Brioude, which is not far from Chavignac. And in May of 1794, she was transported to Paris and interned at Plessis prison. There she wrote a new will, which included the following moving words, and I quote, "With all my heart, I forgive my enemies, if I have any, my persecutors, whoever they may be, and likewise the persecutors of him whom I love. I pray God to fill them with good things and to pardon them as I pardon them. Thou wilt not reject my prayers for those I love, and thou wilt treat us according to the greatness of thy mercy. Have pity upon me, O my God. I declare that I have never ceased to be faithful to my country, that I have never taken part in any intrigue that could have disturbed it, that my most sincere wishes are for its happiness, that the principles of my attachment to it are unshakable, and that no persecution from whatever quarter it might come can change them. A model very dear to my heart gives me an example for these sentiments. I give to my children my most tender blessings, and I ask God in return for this life that I would have liked to devote to their happiness, to assure it himself by making them worthy of him. It is in the name of Jesus Christ that I pray for all these blessings. Filled with confidence in thy loving kindness, I deliver up my dear children. I deliver up my soul into thy hands. I know, my God, that thou art powerful enough to restore them to me on the great day of eternity and to unite us all in a place where we may bless thee forever. In thee and in thee alone I have put my trust. Have mercy on me, O my God." She was in grave danger of being guillotined, and she was saved from almost certain death by the intercession of the American minister in Paris, Gouverneur Morris. Next slide. Oops, there he is. This actually is a painting of Gouverneur Morris owned by Lafayette College. It's really a wonderful portrait. Morris reminded the French government that Madame Lafayette's execution would damage the warmth of feeling that America felt toward the French Revolution, and that America was the only nation in the world that was still friendly to the French Republic. His admonishment was enough to save her life, but not to free her from prison. In the summer of 1794, Adrienne's grandmother, her mother, and her sister, Louise, were arrested and taken to Luxembourg Palace in Paris, which was being used as a prison. After a trial in which her grandmother was mocked for being deaf, they were taken to the guillotine. A priest was able to follow the wagon in disguise and give them absolution. He later wrote about the scene, describing each execution in turn. Their bodies were taken to the grounds of a former convent on the Rue de Picpus and thrown into one of two pits containing more than 1,000 bodies. Just 5 days later, the reign of terror was brought to a close. Adrienne was finally freed in January of 1795, and she had one consuming goal: to get to Austria, where Lafayette was now imprisoned in the fortress of Olmütz, and to win his freedom. If that failed, she planned to join him in his cell. First, she arranged to send George Washington Lafayette to America to his father's friends. In fact, when he got there, the person who helped him and who saw to his affairs was Alexander Hamilton. Her daughters, Anastasie and Virginie, she would take with her to Austria. Next slide, Dana. And this is a nice lithograph of Virginie. By September, let's see, her daughters she would take with her to Austria. By September 1795, Adrienne was on her way to Lafayette. Unable to convince the government to free him, she was issued a certificate of incarceration, and she and her daughters were reunited with Lafayette as the doors clanged shut behind them. For the next 2 years, they would endure the horrible deprivations and unhealthy atmosphere of this prison. Adrienne at first busied herself by writing an account of her mother's life. She wrote it with toothpicks in the margins of another book. Later, though, she became quite ill with fevers, rashes, and swollen limbs. The Austrian emperor, realizing that Lafayette's plight was gaining too much international attention, agreed to let Adrienne leave for medical attention if she would promise not to return. Of course, she refused to promise and so was not allowed to go. The family became quite celebrated as the prisoners of Olmütz, as evidenced by all these prints and large paintings. So that just, if you'll just go through the next 4 slides. And the prints and this very large painting are all owned by Lafayette College. Poems were written about the prisoners of Olmütz, and there were numerous attempts to secure their freedom. Before Adrienne and the daughters arrived, there had been an escape attempt to free Lafayette. He was free very briefly on horseback, and then he ran into his captors again and was re-incarcerated. Let's see. Finally, in September 1797, the family was freed by a treaty signed by Napoleon, who had come to power in France. From Olmütz, the family traveled to Holstein, where they remained in exile until 1799, when they returned to France. Adrienne had gone back to France in advance and negotiated the return of one of her family estates, Lagrange. And if you'll show the next 2 images, it's an engraving of Lagrange and then how it looks today, which is basically the same. Yeah. And this is Lafayette. The family lived there. Lafayette was in sort of semi-retirement during Napoleon's years. And then he re-entered the political life, but the family continued to live at Lagrange until Lafayette's death. It is located about 30 miles east of Paris. Let's see. Adrienne had the life of her mother that she had written at Olmütz printed clandestinely at a private press Lafayette College has a copy of this rare original printing. Next slide, please. This is one of only 6 copies that are known to exist. And this is, our copy doesn't even have a title page. This is the first page of the copy that we have. It's so rare. One other very important task for Adrienne was the establishment of a tomb for her mother. After several years of searching, Adrienne and her sister Pauline finally located the site of the 2 pits off the Rue de Picpus, where victims of the Reign of Terror had been interred. They arranged to have the cemetery restored and cared for by the Ladies of the Sacred Heart and of Perpetual Adoration. On August of 1807, the illness that Adrienne had contracted at the prison of Olmütz recurred. She died on Christmas Eve, surrounded by her family. Her final words were for Lafayette, "I am yours alone," is what she said. And she was buried at Picpus. Next slide, please. Oops, one more. This is a portrait of Adrienne later in her life. Lafayette mourned her deeply. In a letter to his old friend, the celebrated writer Madame de Staël, next slide, please. Soon after Adrienne's death, he wrote, "You are right to be certain that I am very unhappy. I am more unhappy than I believed I could bear. The incomparable woman whom I married when I was 16 and she was 14 was so deeply fused into my existence that it was necessary to have lost her in order to know what part of myself would cease to live." In 1834, more than a quarter of a century later, Lafayette was buried at her side at Picpus under American soil, sent over from Bunker Hill for this purpose. Next slide. And here is the tomb of Lafayette and Adrienne in Picpus Cemetery, and it can be visited. In fact, there is usually a ceremony either occurring on July 4th or in the vicinity of July 4th, the American ambassador leads a delegation to the cemetery, and wreaths are laid and remarks are made, and it's a very moving thing. This ends my presentation, but of course I'm happy to take questions. I thank all of you very much for listening and wonder if we have some questions.
Thanks so much, Diane. And we'll keep an eye on the chat here. Just to start off with some questions, and everybody, just a reminder, put a question mark in the chat, or you can raise your hand with any questions you have. Was communicating with a colleague, and we were just trying to remember Lafayette never made it to Easton as far as we were aware, but we didn't realize that it was as close as Bethlehem. So is that as close as he ever got to Easton?
That is absolutely as close as he ever got. And, you know, that's very close, 15 miles down the road. He spent about a month in Bethlehem recovering from this leg wound, which was serious, but not, not life-threatening in any way. We know that when he was in Bethlehem, he was very impressed by the Moravians. Of course, it was a Moravian town. He read one of their recently published books on the Greenland mission. And, I had always thought that was funny because, I thought, well, what a ripping good read that must have been, the Greenland mission. But it turns out, I just learned from a conference this spring that it was a really celebrated and important book. So I'm interested in delving into that a little bit more. But Lafayette chafed at having to stay there because he wanted to get back to the front and to George Washington.
Thank you so much. And it looks like we do have a few questions. I'm going to start with Lisa Castle. If you want to unmute yourself, Lisa, and we can help you if that's.
Okay, it's just going back to the very beginning of your presentation, Diane, where you showed the hotel, Adrienne's childhood home. I was just wondering what the hotel is because I'd like to stay there.
I think you can. We actually in 2015, the American Friends of Lafayette, which is an organization devoted to Lafayette that was founded at Lafayette College at our centennial, one of our centennial celebrations in 1932. We had several centennials. But they sponsored a wonderful trip to various Lafayette sites, and we went there, and I think we were actually going to eat there, but somehow it didn't work out. But it's a beautiful place, and I think it's the Hotel St. James. It's I should know that, Hotel James, and try Hotel James Paris and see what you get. Okay.
I'm going to look it up for when we can finally travel. And just as a follow-up, it would be a wonderful thing for the First One of Lafayette to take a trip to Paris and France and see all of these locations. So I'm putting that into the hopper.
It's one of the most interesting trips I have ever been on. It was just wonderful. We went to the birthplace, and there's so much one can do around Lafayette. And in fact, Professor Bob Madison and I had planned a trip through the alumni office some years ago, but I can't remember exactly what derailed it, but we never got off the ground. But we had a plan, and I think it could be a wonderful thing for alums.
Yeah, let's resurrect that. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Lisa. There's a couple of questions in the chat here, Diane, about the connection with the younger generation of the Lafayette family. So can you talk about, are we connected to any of the descendants?
Yes, and Lafayette had the three children who survived, and they all married and had children, and so by now there have been so many generations that there are lots of descendants, and we have had connections with several of them. One of the descendants who kind of helps to represent the family. I'm not sure the family, I think the family is not at war with each other at all, but they're different wings of the family now. But the Count Gilbert de Pucy Lafayette, some of you may remember that long ago he was on campus maybe about 20 years ago, and he came and received, I guess that was 2007 when we were celebrating Lafayette's, actually it was his 250th birthday. Lafayette was awarded a posthumous honorary degree, and this descendant, Gilbert de Pucy Lafayette, received it. So his family has stayed, has been interested in the, maintaining ties. There was another descendant who sold an incredible gold piece at auction at Sotheby's, and I met him actually at a dinner at Sotheby's, and he was remarkable, and we got to watch the sale. That was actually very exciting. Unfortunately, we were not able to bid on the thing that went for $5 million, but at any rate, he and Dan Weiss struck up a friendship, and they exchanged their sons for a few weeks in the summer. So Arnaud, his name is Arnaud, I'm going to forget the full name, but he sent his son over to stay with Teddy Weiss, and then Teddy went over and stayed with this family in France. So there was that connection. We've also had visits from family members bringing their children to see Lafayette College, and along the way several contacts.
Wonderful. I'm just going through, there's a list of questions here. So Sandy Kaczynski just wanted, I'm sure this is actually a whole other presentation, but could you just speak for a minute about why Lafayette was named, why the college was named after Lafayette if he never made it to Easton?
Sure. Lafayette College had the good fortune, I think, to be founded in 19, well, we weren't actually, the citizens of Easton gathered in December of 1824 to talk about founding a college. And 3 months earlier, Lafayette had arrived for his farewell tour of America, and there was not a bigger event in American history, probably up to that time or even later. I mean, this was such a huge deal, this farewell tour. Lafayette visited every state in the Union, and if you were founding a college during the farewell tour, you would be foolish not to name it for Lafayette unless you had somebody you absolutely had to name it for. So we were the lucky school that got to bear his name. And I think it was probably, a unanimous decision to name it for Lafayette. And that decision was made in December of 1824 to name the college. And then, of course, we didn't get our charter till 26. We didn't open our doors to 30 till 1832. That's why we've had so many centennials. We celebrated centennials in 1924 and 1932. So I think we're going to celebrate our bicentennial in 2026 to go with the founding date. So we've got a lot of dates to work with, which is nice.
Me too.
But that's why.
And the next question that I have here is from Adrienne Stark, who said, Cy Fleck first told me about Madame Lafayette and about the Adrienne Club. Can you tell us a little bit more about the Adrienne Club?
Yes, the Adrienne Club was the faculty spouse club. Most institutions had a women's club associated for faculty wives. That's when almost all faculty were male, and they would have clubs for the wives, and ours happened to be named for Adrienne. And it did typical things. I mean, they did fundraising and charitable things, but it was also a social club. And during World War II, when we had so many married couples on campus after the war, after World War II, we had a number of married couples. And so they formed a club for the wives of the students, and they named it the Emily Club. And Emily was the wife of George Washington Lafayette. So the big club was Adrienne, the wife of Lafayette. The Emily Club was Emily was named for the wife of George Washington Lafayette, Lafayette's son.
Thank you. We have a question about how old was Lafayette when he died?
I believe he was about 77. I would probably need to do the math. He was born in 1757 and he died in 1824. I'll let you guys do the math. But, yeah.
And I'm looking through, it looks like we found possibly a name of the hotel, and there's a trip being planned. Lenita Dorflinger asks, where does the college keep the wonderful works of art in our possession?
Yes, great question. Hi to Lenita. Yes, so the Skillman Library has most of the prints. The art collection has some of the prints as well, but most of the prints are in Skillman Library. That collection was actually built by the college librarian in the 30s and 40s with the help of the American Friends of Lafayette. The paintings are all in the college art collection. And of course, now they're in the wonderful new facility that we have, the Kirby Center in the Williams Center. That's where the portraits are kept. It's wonderful to have that proper housing for those wonderful things, but that's where they are. It's a split collection, but of course there's close collaboration between special collections and the art collection.
Thank you. And I think those are all the questions. Oh, can anyone translate the wedding menu that Diane shared? So Diane, I don't know if you know what the wedding menu has on it.
I don't, but we can certainly send a copy to somebody who can translate it. It would be fun to recreate it, wouldn't it?
It would be. That would be a fun dinner. And I think I caught all the questions in the chat. Somebody please raise your hand if I missed anything. Well, I just want to say thank you so much, Diane. If anybody has additional questions, please feel free to share them, and we can follow up later with some answers from Diane. One quick piece of housekeeping I will share in the chat in just a minute. Shark exploitation is tonight at 8 p.m. If you are interested in seeing that, make sure that you log back on at 8 p.m. for that. And Dana did share the gamification code for this, this session. And then I'm going to turn it over to Sue Karras to wrap us up here with just a few words. Oh, let's see if Dana, can we help Sue to unmute?
There I go.
Oh, there you go.
Okay, so what a way to wrap it up. I could listen to Diane Shaw talk about the Marquis de Lafayette and Adrienne forever. She's got a beautiful voice and a wonderful way of telling the stories of Lafayette, and it's great to have her back doing so. So thank you. I want to echo what Barb said at the beginning. Thanks to everybody. We've had such a great year. It's been different than we thought it was going to be, but it's been fabulous. And I also think that, you know, one of the sort of surprises of COVID was maybe we got to share more time together virtually than we ever would have been able to share if we all were trying to get to the college or get to New York or be physically together someplace else. So I think we've learned the joys of Zoom for the purpose of the First Women of Lafayette. So we're going to continue the great programming to some extent in whatever way we possibly can. So we welcome all your ideas going forward. But importantly, next year we're going to celebrate, we're going to have a 50th something. It's like the centennials, Diane, we have 50th. Celebrate time and time again. So next year is the 50th anniversary of women's athletics at Lafayette. So there'll be programming around that. So I'm just in awe of the collective power of this group. We doubled the size of the scholarship through this important year, and hopefully we'll do that again next year with continued enthusiasm for a great mission. And really with Allison Byerly now moving on, one of her great missions was financial aid. And so we've helped, I think, to see that come to fruition under our own little umbrella here. So with that, I guess it's time for the final toast, but not really final, because as I said, we'll be back together again sooner rather than later. So what I said at the first meeting of this group back in September is that it's our collective shared unrepeatable memories that bind us, and our mission in empowering this scholarship moving forward and getting together that enriches us. And so long may we run to the women of Lafayette and the First Women of Lafayette. And thank you, Diane. So now I'm crying. Diane was afraid she was going to cry, but now I am. So anyway, thanks everybody.
Thank you, Sue and Barbara, for all your
And
leadership.
by the way, maybe we'll share a link to the scholarship tomorrow. I don't know. But,
we will definitely follow up with more information about how you can close out the year. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Sue and Barbara. Thank you, Diane. Have a good night.
Good night, all.